Hello friends, welcome to Prashant IAS. So friends, in the last class, we have discussed about Regulating Act and Charter Acts. And I have also told you about the revolt of 1857. That in year 1857, the revolt or the mutiny broke out. But friends, somehow Britishers successfully suppressed the revolt. But the Parliament of Britain blamed the policies and governance of British East India Company for the revolt of India. And now Parliament was determined to snatch the rule of India from British East India Company. Okay, and in the last class I have also told you in Charter Act of 1853 that Parliament of Britain was planning to snatch the rule of India from British East India Company. Okay, so now with these intentions, Parliament of Britain in year 1858 passed Government of India Act 1858. Okay, so Parliament of Britain passed Government of India Act 1858. So now what were the provisions of this act? So friends, first of all, the rule of India was transferred from British East India Company to British Crown. British Crown means Queen of Britain. Okay, so now what does it mean? It means that now British East India Company was no more the ruler of India. The control or rule of India was no more in the hands of British East India Company. Now Queen became the ruler of India. The control of India was in the hands of Queen. Okay. Now what was the second provision? So friends, now the Governor General of India was designated to Governor General of India and Viceroy. Okay. So what is the difference between two? So friends, now the post of Governor General of India was changed into Governor General of India and Viceroy. And the first Governor General of India and Viceroy was Lord Canning. So friends, Governor General of India and Viceroy are two different posts. Okay, Governor General of India and Viceroy of India were two different posts. But same person was recruited for both of these posts. For example, Lord Canning was the Governor General of India and Lord Canning was the Viceroy of India. Okay, so now what is the difference between these two posts? What is the difference between Governor General of India and Viceroy of India? So friends, at that point of time, the entire India was divided into two parts. The first part was British Indian provinces. Okay, so these were those provinces which were under the direct control of Britishers. Means these were those provinces which were directly ruled by Britishers. The British government was making law. British government was executing law. British government was collecting tax. Okay, so they were under the direct rule of Britishers. For example, Bengal, Madras, Bombay, Agra. Okay, but on the other hand, there were princely states. Okay, so what were these princely states? So friends, these were the provinces which were not under the direct control of Britishers. Okay, these were the provinces which were not ruled by Britishers. These were the provinces which were ruled by the Indian rulers, which were ruled by the local rulers. For example, the state of Kashmir. Okay, so there were some princely states which were ruled by the Indian rulers, local rulers. Okay, but friends, now I will tell you about a treaty. Okay, and this treaty is known as the Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance, and it was introduced by a person known as Lord Wellesley, and this treaty is known as Lord Wellesley's Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance. So when I will teach you modern Indian history, then I will teach you about this treaty in much detail. But here I am just giving you a little idea so that you can understand the difference between British Indian provinces and princely states. So friends, what happened that most of the Indian states signed the Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance with Lord Wellesley. Means they all were the signatory of that treaty. They all were bounded by the provisions of that treaty. Now what were the provisions of that treaty? So according to the Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance, the Indian rulers were free for their internal work. They were sovereign internally. Now what does it mean? It means that they could collect revenue from their public. Okay, they could maintain law and order in their state. they could maintain policing. Okay, so they were free internally, but externally they were not sovereign. Externally they were not free. They were under the control of British government. They were subordinate to British government. Okay, so externally who was sovereign? British government was sovereign, and Indian states were not sovereign. They were under the British Indian government. For example, if a prince had to declare a war with another state, then he had to take permission from the British government. Okay, if a prince had to make alliance with another state, then he had to take permission from British government. Okay, if a prince had to enter into a treaty with another Indian state, then first of all he had to take permission from whom? British government. It means that Indian princely states were not sovereign externally. Okay, so friends, Viceroy of India was the officer who was in charge of all these princely states. Okay, so now these princely states, for example, the Indian prince, if they had to declare a war, then they had to take permission from Viceroy. If they had to enter into treaty with another Indian state, so they had to take permission from Viceroy. So Viceroy was the in charge of princely states. Okay, but friends, now you will ask that, sir, why why the same person was recruited on both of these posts? Okay, so this was to avoid the conflicts. Okay, so this was to avoid the conflict. Why? Because when friends, because what happened, that when I taught you about regulating act 1773, so there was a conflict between the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of Supreme Court, and the Governor General of Bengal. Okay, so there was a conflict between Chief Justice of Supreme Court and Governor General of Bengal, that who is supreme. Okay, so now to avoid the conflict, both of these posts were vested into a single person. So a single person was recruited on both of these posts. And who was the first Governor General and Viceroy of India? So Lord Canning was the first Governor General and Viceroy of India. Now friends, what was the next provision? So friends, this act ended the dual government. Okay, so the act of 1858 ended the dual government. Now what does it mean? So friends, in previous class I have taught you about Pitt's India Act 1784. So according to Pitt's India Act 1784, the commercial functions of the company were vested in the court of directors. Okay, and the political functions of the company were controlled by board of control. So now Government of India Act 1858 abolished both of these bodies. Government of India Act 1858 abolished court of directors as well as board of control. And this act vested all the powers of court of directors and board of control in Secretary of State. Okay, so now Secretary of State was a new post, and Secretary of State had all the powers which were earlier enjoyed by court of directors and board of control. Okay, now who was that Secretary of State? So first of all, he was a cabinet minister. Okay, Secretary of State was a cabinet minister. So now what is that cabinet minister? So friends, there are many types of ministers. For example, cabinet minister, minister of state, okay, minister of state independent charge. Okay, so friends, when I will teach you about the Indian government, okay, then I will take this topic in detail. But for now, you just understand that cabinet minister is a first class minister. Cabinet minister is a most powerful minister. Okay, so Secretary of State was a cabinet minister, and as he was a minister, so he was responsible to the Parliament of Britain. Okay, so Secretary of State was responsible to the Parliament of Britain. Now what does it mean? So it means that Parliament could ask questions from Secretary of State. Okay, Parliament could ask questions from Secretary of State about his works, and Secretary of State was answerable to Parliament. Okay, Parliament also had the power to punish that Secretary of State. So this Secretary of State was responsible to Parliament. Now friends, this Secretary of State had the complete authority of India. Okay, you can imagine like this, he was the boss of Governor General of India. Governor General of India was the representative of Secretary of State in India. So Secretary of State was the officer who had the entire authority of India. He was very powerful officer. He had all authority of India. Okay. His decision was final in the matter of India. So we can say that Secretary of State was the officer who was in charge of Indian colony of Britishers. Okay. So Secretary of State was the in charge of India. Now, friends, there was a Council of India. There was a body known as Council of India. And the work of that body was to assist and advise the Secretary of State. Okay. So, Council of India was the body which was made to assist and advise the Secretary of State. There used to be 15 members in this body. Okay. So, there were 15 members in this body, and this body was chaired by Secretary of State. Okay. So Secretary of State was the chairperson of Council of India, and the main function of Council of India was to assist the Secretary of State, was to give advice to the Secretary of State. Okay. Now friends, Secretary of State and his council can sue and can be sued in England and in India. Okay. Now what does it mean? So for example, imagine that there is a Jamindar. Okay. Now there is some conflict between that Jamindar and British government. Okay. Why British who is the in charge of British Indian government? Secretary of State was the in charge of British Indian government. Okay. So there is some conflict between that Jamindar and British Indian government. Now, according to this provision, that Jamindar could file case in the court of law against Secretary of State. Okay. So that Jamindar had the power to file case in the court of law against that Secretary of State and his council. Okay. And he could file the case in India as well as in England. Similarly, this Secretary of State and his council also had the power to file the case against that Jamindar in the Supreme Court of India as well as in the Supreme Court of England. Okay. So it means that this Secretary of State and his council was established just like a body corporate. Means it was established like a corporate body. Okay. Means it can sue and it can be sued in India and in England. Okay. So it also had the power to file case against someone in India as well as England, and anyone could file case in the court of law against that Secretary of State and his council in the Supreme Court of India and the Supreme Court of Britain. Okay. So friends, now what were the provisions of this Indian Council Act 1861? Okay. So friends, first of all, this act provided for the expansion of the Executive Council of Governor General. Okay. So I have told you that there was an Executive Council, and the function of that council was to assist, was to help the Governor General when he was performing his work. Okay. So now this act provided for the expansion of this Executive Council of Governor General. It means that now a new member, a fifth member was added to the Executive Council of Governor General. Till now, there used to be only 4 members in the Executive Council of Governor General, but by the Act of 1861, fifth member was added to the Executive Council of Governor General of India. Okay. Now friends, this act also provided for the addition of 6 to 12 members for legislation. Now what does it mean? It means that this act empowered the Governor General of India. This act provided the power to Governor General of India to nominate additional members to his Executive Council. Okay, to nominate additional member to his council. Okay, and these members would help the Governor General of India when he would make laws. Okay, so these additional members would not assist, would not help the Governor General of India when he will execute the laws. These members will assist the Governor General of India when he will make the laws. So they were legislative members. Okay, and according to the Council Act of 1861, minimum 6 members should be added. Okay, there should be minimum 6 members, and at max means maximum Governor General of India can add 12 members to his council. Okay, and these are not executive members, these are legislative members, and the function of these members was to assist the Governor General of India when he was making laws. Okay, now friends, these members were nominated for a period of 2 years. Means these 6 to 12 members would be retired after a period of 2 years. Okay, and at least half members should be non-officials. Okay, so at least half of the additional members means the members who are not the executive members, members who would assist the Governor General of India when he will make the law. Okay, so these additional members, so at least half of these additional members should be non-officials, means they should not be the officers of British government. For example, in Indian government, there are many officers. For example, IAS officers, IPS officers, IFS officers, okay, rangers, and there are many others officers. Okay, so similarly, this act says that the at least half of the additional members should not be officials. Okay, they should not be the officers of British company. Okay, British government. Now, friends, after this act, the nomination of Indians also started in the Council of Governor General of India. Okay, so then Governor General of India and Viceroy nominated three Indian members in his council, and they were Raja of Banaras, Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkan Rao. So they were the people who were nominated for the first time in the Council of Governor General of India. So Governor General of India nominated three Indians in his council for the first time: Raja of Banaras, Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkan Rao. Okay, so this was the first time from when the nomination of Indians started in the Council of Governor General of India. Okay, now friends, this act also provided for the decentralization. Now, what does it mean? So, I have told you in the Charter Act of 1833 that the legislative powers of the presidencies of Bombay and Madras were taken away. Okay, so I have told you that the Charter Act of 1833 snatched the legislative powers from the governors of Madras and Bombay presidencies. Means now they didn't have the power to make law. Okay, they lose their powers to make law. Okay, but friends, Indian Council Act 1861 provided or restored their legislative powers. Means now the governor and the council of Bombay and Madras presidencies got the legislative powers. Now they had the power to make law for their presidencies. Okay, so it means that decentralization started, because what happened in the Charter Act of 1833, that all the legislative powers were centralized in the Governor General of India. All the legislative powers were centralized in the hands of Governor General of India, but the Indian Council Act of 1861 decentralized those powers, and Indian Council Act 1861 distributed those powers, and the governors of the governors of Madras and Bombay presidencies got the legislative powers. Means now they were able to make laws for their respective presidencies. Okay, now friends, according to Indian Council Act 1861, new legislative councils were to be established for Bengal, North-West Frontier Province, and Punjab. Okay, so new separate legislative councils were to be established. New lawmaking bodies were to be established for the provinces of Bengal, North-West Frontier Province, and Punjab. Okay, so the new legislative council for Bengal was established in 1862. For Northwest Frontier Province, it was established in 1866, and for Punjab Province, new legislative council was established in year 1897. Okay. Now, friends, what were the powers of Viceroy according to the Act of 1861? So, Act of 1861 provided many powers to Viceroy and Governor General of India. Okay. So, first of all, he had the power of making rules and regulations for the conduct of business of Executive Council. Now, what does it mean? It means that Governor General of India and Viceroy had the power to make rules for the functioning of Executive Council. Okay, and the rules made by him were the final. Nobody could challenge the rules made by him. So, Governor General of India had the power to make rules for the for the work of Executive Council. Okay. Now, friends, he could promulgate ordinances without the concurrence of Legislative Council during an emergency. Now, what does it mean? It means that if there is some emergency, for example, there is some revolt, okay, people are coming on street with arms, people are firing on the police. So if there is some emergency, then Governor General of India had the power to make law without the consultation of Legislative Council. Okay, means it was not necessary to take the opinion of the Executive or Legislative Council. Means it was not necessary for Governor General of India to take the opinion or consultation of Legislative Council, and he was empowered to make law. Ordinance is also a type of law, so he could make law for entire India during emergency. Okay, and the life of such a ordinance was 6 months. Okay, so life of such a law was only 6 months. Means if the law is not sanctioned by the Legislative Council within 6 months, then that law will be expired. Okay, so Viceroy and Governor General of India had the power to make law without the permission, without the consultation of his Legislative Council during the emergency. But the life of that law would be only 6 months. Okay, now let's move further. So, friends, he was empowered to alter, modify, or adjust the limits of provinces. Now, what does it mean? So, for example, suppose there is a province named Bengal. So, Governor General of India had the power to change the name of that province. Governor General of India had the power to change the boundary of that province, to change the area of that province. If Governor General wants, then he could easily make 4 provinces out of a single province. He was empowered to divide a single province into 2 provinces. He had the power to merge 2 provinces. Means he was very powerful. Okay, so he had the power to change the area of a province. He had the power to change the boundary of a province. Okay, so he was very powerful. Now, friends, every bill passed by the council required the assent of viceroy. Okay, so in yesterday's class also I have told you about the procedure to make law. So what was the procedure to make law? So first of all, the bill will be passed by the Legislative Council. Okay, so first of all, Legislative Council will pass the bill, and after that the signature of or the assent of the viceroy was mandatory on that bill. Until viceroy would not give his signature on that bill, then until then that bill will not become law. Okay, so the assent of viceroy was very important for any bill to become law. Now, friends, Governor General of India and Viceroy also had the veto power. Now, what does it mean? It means that he can refuse to sign any bill passed by the Legislative Council. Okay, he can refuse to sign any bill passed by the Legislative Council, and he can declare any bill as invalid or null and void. So he was very powerful. Now, friends, it was the duty of Governor General of India and Viceroy that he had to communicate. Communicate means he had to tell all the laws to Secretary of State for India. Okay, so I have told you about Secretary of State in the Government of India Act 1858. So now it was the duty of Viceroy to communicate all the laws to Secretary of State for India, who could disallow them with the assent of Crown. Now what does it mean? It means that Secretary of State had the power to declare any law passed by the Legislative Council as null and void. But Secretary of State could do so with the permission of Parliament. Okay, so indirectly we can say that the Parliament of Britain had the power to declare any law passed by the Legislative Council as null and void. Okay, so Parliament of Britain had the power to declare any law, any legislation, any rule passed by the Legislative Council of Governor General of India as null and void. So Parliament was also very powerful. Now, friends, this act also introduced portfolio system. Now, what is this portfolio system? So I will explain it to you with the help of the example of India. So we know that Prime Minister of India is the head of the government. Okay, Prime Minister of India is the head of the government, but government has many departments. For example, finance, military, okay, petroleum, okay, education. So there are different persons, there are different ministers who are the in charge of different departments. For example, we have HRD minister. Okay, for example, we have we have defense minister, we have home minister, we have railway minister. So for different departments of the government, there are different ministers, and these ministers are in charge of their department. So this is known as portfolio system. Means a separate person, a single person is in charge of a single department. So friends, the act of 18 the act of 1861 started the portfolio system. So a member of the executive council of governor general of India was made in charge of one or more departments of the government. For example, one member was made in charge of the military, so he was known as defense minister. Okay, one member was made in charge of the finance, money, budget, so he was known as finance minister. And he was authorized to issue final orders for his department. Means his decision was final for the affairs of his department. His decision was final. Okay, so this was portfolio system. So friends, then comes the Indian Council Act 1892. So what were the provisions of this Indian Council Act 1892? So first of all, the act increased the number of additional members in the central as well as provincial legislative councils. Okay, now what does it mean? So friends, now what was the function of these additional members? So I have just told you that the main function of these additional members was to assist the Governor General of India when governor made laws. Okay, so their main work was to assist the Governor General of India in lawmaking. Okay, so now according to the Indian Council Act 1892, this the number of members in the legislative council of the Governor General of India was increased. Okay, so according to Indian Council Act 1892, the number of members in the legislative council of Governor General of India increased. Okay, so now it was the duty of Governor General of India to nominate minimum 10 members in his legislative council. Okay, so now it was the duty of Governor General of India to nominate minimum 10 members in his legislative council. Okay, but he had the power to nominate as much as 16 members in his legislative council. So the number of additional members in the legislative council of the Governor General of India should be between 10 to 16. Okay, and similarly friends, the number of members in the provincial legislative councils also increased. So there were different numbers for different provinces, but here the main idea is that the number of members in the provincial legislative councils also increased. Okay, then what happened? The powers of legislative councils was also increased. Okay, so friends, now the members could discuss on budget, because earlier what was the practice that these members were not allowed to discuss on the budget, but according to the Indian Council Act of 1892, these members got the power to discuss on budget. Okay, and now these members also got the power to ask question. They also get the power to ask question from the executive council, and okay, they also get the power to ask question from the executive council on domestic matters. Domestic matters like maintenance of peace, law and order, policing. Okay, okay, agriculture. So they also get the power to ask question from the executive council. Executive council means the body which was helping the Governor General of India when he was executing the laws. Okay, so it was just like a executive wing of the government. So now this legislative council also had the power to ask question from the executive executive council. Okay, but there were certain limitations. So what were those limitations? So friends, now also this legislative council did not get power to vote on the budget. They only had the power to discuss the budget, but they did not had the power to vote on that budget. So practically we can say the passing or not passing of budget was not in their hand. So practically they did not have any powers, but we can say that for namesake their powers were increased. Why? Because at least they had the power to discuss on budget. Okay, but what is actual power? Actual power is that when you can stop the budget from passing if budget is wrong, but they did not have the right to vote. Okay, they did not have the right to vote, so they did not have the power to stop the budget from passing even if the budget was wrong. Okay, so they did not have the right to vote. Secondly friends, if they had to ask questions from the Executive Council, then first of all they had to take permission from Governor General of India. Okay, and only when Governor General of India would give them permission, then only they were allowed to ask questions from the Executive Council. Okay, and moreover, the Legislative Council, the members of Legislative Council were not allowed to ask supplementary questions from the members of Executive Council. So there were many limitations on their powers. So practically we can say they didn't have any power, but for the namesake their powers were increased. Okay, their powers were increased for only namesake. Okay, they did not have any powers. Now what was the third feature of this act? So friends, a system of indirect election was introduced to elect the members of council. Okay, so for the first time the indirect elections were introduced in British Indian government. So a system of indirect election was introduced to elect the members of council. Now for the members of Central Legislative Council. Okay, so friends, the members of Central Legislative Councils were nominated by the Governor General of India on the recommendation of Provincial Legislative Council and Bengal Chamber of Commerce. Okay, now what does it means? It means that now Governor General of India was not using his discretion to nominate the members. Now he did not have discretionary powers. Okay, now he had to follow, he was bound by the recommendation of Provincial Legislative Council and Bengal Chamber of Commerce. Okay, so the members of Central Legislative Council were nominated by the Governor General of India on the recommendation of Provincial Legislative Council and Bengal Chamber of Commerce. So it was just like a indirect election. Although the word election was not used in Indian Council Act 1892, but we can say that it was just like a indirect election. Now, what was the procedure of the election of the members of Provincial Legislative Council? So, friends, the members of Provincial Legislative Council were nominated by the governors of these provinces, were nominated by the governor of the province on the recommendation of the member of universities, district boards, municipalities, trade unions, jamindars, chamber of commerce. Okay, so now what is university? So you all know there are many universities in India. For example, Delhi University, Jawaharlal University, okay, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Now what are district boards? So for example, Jal Board, okay, Electricity Board. So these are district boards. Now municipality, all you all know what is municipality. Now who were jamindars? So jamindars were big landholders. So they had a big piece of land with them. They were very very rich people. Okay, and there was Chamber of Commerce. Okay, so friends, what happened that now how the members of Provincial Legislative Councils will be elected? So now members of Provincial Legislative Council would be nominated by the governor on the recommendation of universities, district board, municipality, jamindar and Chamber of Commerce, etc. Okay, so it was just like a indirect election. So Indian Council Act 1892 was very important because for the first time indirect elections were started in the Legislative Council of Central Legislative Council as well as Provincial Legislative Council. Okay, but friends, do remember that the word election was not used in the original charter. The word nomination was used in the original charter, but the process was just like an indirect election. So we can say the indirect election was introduced in Central Legislative Council as well as Provincial Legislative Council for the first time. So friends, that's all for today. In the next class, we will start our discussion with Morley Minto Reform or Government of India Act 1909. Okay, at last, I request you all to like the video, comment, subscribe to my channel and share this channel to all the people you know who are preparing for UPSC or any other state PSC. Till then, take care of yourself. Thank you.